I do not give results to anybody. The results we announce formally as INEC are results that are declared here.
The administration of democratic elections in Nigeria dates back to the period before independence when the Electoral Commission of Nigeria (ECN) was inaugurated in 1958 to conduct the 1959 federal elections. Prior to 1958, regional laws and government regulated and conducted elections. ECN was headed by an expatriate, Ronald Edward Wright, and 4 Nigerian members representing each region and the Federal Capital Territory of Lagos. The Federal Electoral Commission (FEC), established in 1960, conducted the immediate post-independence federal and regional elections of 1964 and 1965. Prior to the conduct of the 1964 election, the Chief Electoral Officer, Kofo Abayomi, resigned, and some party officials from the NCNC and Action Group doubted the credibility of a free and fair election. The electoral body was dissolved after the military coup of 1966. In 1978, the Federal Electoral Commission (FEDECO) was constituted by the regime of General Olusegun Obasanjo, organizing the elections of 1979, which ushered in the Nigerian Second Republic under the leadership of Alhaji Shehu Shagari. It also conducted the general elections of 1983. Lagos, Nigeria, August 19. Officials of 3 of the 4 parties whose candidates lost in Nigeria's presidential election said that the results were fraudulent. Alhaji Shehu Shagari, head of the National Party, received nearly 5.7 million votes and is expected to take over from the military on October 1st, becoming Nigeria's first civilian president in 13 years. Sam Inko of the People's Redemption Party said that a ruling by the Electoral Commission confirming Mr. Shagari's victory was a murder of democracy. Olunogo, National Secretary of the Nigerian People's Party, said his party reserved the right to take any constitutional steps it considered necessary to protect the integrity of the nation and democracy. Obafemi Awolowo, candidate of the Unity Party, has remained silent. Chief Awolowo was second in the voting with 4.9 million votes. Nnamdi Azikiwe of the Nigerian People's Party was third with 2.8 million votes. Malam Aminu Kano, the People's Redemption Party candidate, and Alhaji Waziri Ibrahim of the Great Nigerian People's Party each polled just over 1 million votes. Makelani, chairman of the commission that oversees the election August 11, said declaring the winner that Mr. Shagari has satisfied provisions of the country's 1977 electoral decree. The complicated decree stipulates that the winning candidate must have received the most votes and 25% of the votes cast in at least 2/3 of the 19 states that make up Nigeria. Mr. Shagari's opponent maintained that he had not complied with the second provision because he did not carry 25% of the votes in 13 states. But Chief Ani ruled that Mr. Shagari met the condition. Legal experts say the commission ruling cannot be challenged in court. Elections have already been held for a parliamentary and governors of the 19 states. At a new conference, Mr. Shagari made no mention of the dispute. He praised his stalwart opponents for putting up a gallant fight and called on them to join him in building a united, prosperous, and vibrant Nigeria. The military government that organized the election has vowed to honor the result and step down. However, the Awolowo vs. Shagari case was a lawsuit between Chief Obafemi Awolowo and Alhaji Shehu Shagari, in which Chief Obafemi Awolowo's petition challenged the declaration of Shehu Shagari as the president-elect of the August 11, 1979 presidential election.
Fedeco was by no means alone in his acts of perfidy and his unbridled desire to see Shagari win the presidential race by hook or by crook. It was a combined operation by Fedeco and the federal military government. From the very beginning, both the federal military government and Fedeco promised us free and fair elections. And the federal military government, through its spokesman, including no less a personality than the then military head of state, never tired of repeatedly assuring the people of Nigeria that in all the elections it had no candidate. We now know that these solemn assurances are false and made in bad faith and with a view to deceive.
In December 1995, the military government of General Sani Abacha established the National Electoral Commission of Nigeria, which conducted another set of elections. These elected institutions were not inaugurated before the sudden death of General Abacha on June 1998 aborted the process. In 1998, General Abdul Salami Abubakar's administration dissolved NECON and established the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. INEC organized the transitional elections that ushered in the Nigerian Fourth Republic on May 29, 1999. In January 2015, the Bring Back Our Girls group raised the alarm over plans by the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) to exclude Chibok and some communities currently under the control of the Boko Haram from getting the permanent voter cards (PVCs) for the February elections.
Boko Haram come the end. I hope, inshallah, Mr. President can solve all these problems for Boko Haram.
The chairman of the first Nigeria Federal Electoral Commission was Chief Eyo Eswa, 1964 to 1966. In the First Republic, when General Olusegun Obasanjo prepared for a return to civilian power in the Second Republic, he established a new Federal Electoral Commission headed by Chief Michael Ani to supervise the 1979 elections. Ani was succeeded by Justice Victor Oviye-Whiskey. During the Ibrahim Babangida and Sani Abacha regimes, which attempted returns to democracy, the National Electoral Commission of Nigeria was headed by Professor Eme Awa, 1987 to 1989. Professor Humphrey Nwosu, 1989 to 1993. Professor Okon Uwa and Chief Soma Dagogo Jack, 1994 to 1998. General Abdul Salam Abubakar established the current INEC with Justin Ephraim Akpata as chairman. Akpata had to deal with 26 political associations, giving only 9 provisional registration as political parties for the 1998-1999 elections, eventually whittled down to 3 parties. Despite efforts to ensure free and fair elections, the process drew serious criticism from international observers.
And that's what I heard from the people we saw yesterday, Charlotte. They want the generals out of control. They do not like what has happened to their country during the period of military rule, and now they want to try democracy. And I heard that in every neighborhood I went to yesterday. So the military, I think, will have to do a lot of soul searching, understand that it is their place in society to defend the institutions of society and not to take advantage of those institutions.
After Akpata died in January 2000, the government of President Olusegun Obasanjo appointed Abel Gwabadia, Nigeria's chief electoral officer, a position that was confirmed by the Nigerian Senate in May 2000. Gwabadia was responsible for the 2003 elections, which were marred by widespread violence and other irregularities. In June 2005, Gwabadia retired and was succeeded by Professor Maurice Iwu. Soon after being appointed, Iwu announced that foreign monitors will not be allowed during elections, but only foreign elections observers. This decision was condemned by politicians and civil society groups who called for his immediate removal from office. The conduct of the 2007 election was again criticized as falling below acceptable democratic standards. On 8 June 2010, Professor Atihuru Muhammadu Jega was nominated by President Goodluck Jonathan.
First and foremost, the Independent National Electoral Commission, which I am privileged to chair, has to do its work with professionalism, without partiality, and creating a level playing field for all contestants and all political parties. We have resolved to do this just as we have done in 2015. We, in fact, have planned to do even better in order to have to further enforce the integrity of the electoral process.
As the new INEC chairman, subject to Senate confirmation as a replacement for Iwu, who had vacated the post on 28 April 2010, Jega's nomination as INEC chairman followed approved by a meeting of the National Council of State called by President Jonathan and attended by former head of state Yakubu Gowon, Muhammadu Buhari, Ibrahim Babangida, Abdul Salam Abubakar, Ernest Shonekan, Olusegun Obasanjo, and Shehu Shagari. The Senate President David Mark, Speaker of the House of Representatives Oladimeji Bankole, and most of the state governors also attended the meeting. On an unanimous approval by the Council of the nominee for this critical appointment, avoided controversy about whether or not the President should appoint the chairman of the INEC. Reactions to the announcement from a broad spectrum of political leaders and organizations were positive, although some voiced concern that it could be too late to implement real reforms before the 2011 elections. During the campaign for the 2015 Nigerian general elections, Attahiru Jega faced fierce criticism from both the opposition and the ruling party. Attahiru Jega's 5-year term came to an end on June 30, 2015. And though he was qualified for reappointment, the chances of such became remote given the allegations of bias against him by campaign officials of President Goodluck. President Muhammadu Buhari appointed Professor Mahmood Yakubu as INEC chairman. Professor Yakubu took over from Amina Bala Zakari, who was the acting chairman after Jega left. The INEC has encountered several controversies in the run-up to elections in the country, most notably the April 2007 general elections, including criticism about its preparedness from Sada Abubakar, Sultan of Sokoto, and a dispute over its disqualification of Vice President Atiku Abubakar's candidacy. The Supreme Court ruled that the INEC cannot qualify candidates, so Abubakar's name was added to ballots at the last minute. On the subject of election irregularities, INEC spokesman Philip Umuadi said on April 19 that we are not sitting on any crisis in Nigeria. The mission of INEC is to serve as an independent and effective EMB committed to the conduct of free, fair, and credible elections for sustainable democracy in Nigeria. The vision of INEC is to be one of the best election management bodies, EMB, in the world that meets the aspirations of the Nigerian people. In the build-up to 2015 general elections, INEC under Jega introduced smart card reader for the verification of voters and their voting cards to minimize incidents of fraud and rigging. The introduction of card readers was hailed by many Nigerians, but a group of 4 minor political parties who claimed to be acting on behalf of 15 political parties kicked against it and urged INEC to suspend the use of card reader in the 2015 elections. The 2015 general elections were adjudged the most credible, free and fair elections since the return of democracy in 1999. INEC was accused of widespread electoral irregularities in the 2019 presidential elections, including cases of ballot paper unavailability, smart card readers malfunctioning, and large cancellation of valid votes. The main opposition, People's Democratic Party, and its presidential candidate challenged the result of the election in court. Contrary to expectations of major irregularities and mass violence voiced in the run-up to the 2015 general elections in Nigeria, the vote took place without centralized systematic fraud and proceeded largely peacefully. Opposition party candidate Muhammadu Buhari won the presidential election, and results were quickly accepted by incumbent President Goodluck Jonathan, bringing about the first peaceful handover of power by an incumbent president in Nigeria history. In comparison, massive irregularities and violence in earlier elections in 2007 and 2011 had triggered widespread protests and rioting during and after the vote. At face value, this evidence suggests a link between the incidence of election fraud and popular mobilization, where elections marred by irregularities are followed by contention, whereas the absence of large-scale manipulation produces more stable and peaceful outcomes. The political science literature largely confirms such a link between electoral manipulation on the one hand and non-violent and violent collective protests on the other, suggesting that election fraud induces grievances and reveals information to citizens that combine to facilitate various types of collective action. Yet, while theoretical arguments focus on individual level motivations, systematically empirical assessments have evaluated them at more aggregate levels. In 2007, the Nigerian government interfered with legal challenges to the badly flawed presidential elections held in 2007. Human Rights Watch researchers in 2 northern states observed widespread violence and vote rigging that was mirrored throughout the country. Human Rights Watch observed violence and intimidation in Gombe and Katsina states in an electoral process that denied large numbers of voters the opportunity to cast their votes. Where voting did occur, it was marred by the late opening of polls, a severe shortage of ballot papers, the widespread intimidation of voters, the seizure of ballot boxes by gangs of thugs, vote buying and other irregularities. Instead of guaranteeing citizens basic rights to vote freely, Nigerian government and electoral officials actively colluded in the fraud and violence that marred the presidential polls in some areas. According to domestic and international election observers, the same trends were in evidence throughout much of the country. The Transition Monitoring Group, Nigeria's largest domestic observer organization, called for a rerun of the presidential polls, while European Union observers documented massive irregularities and said that the process cannot be considered to have been credible. Teams from the U.S. National Democratic Institute and the International Republic Institute both said that the process failed the Nigerian people. Human Rights Watch and others found similar patterns of fraud and abuse in state polls held nationwide a week before the presidential election. The end result in both cases was a landslide victory for the ruling People's Democratic Party, PDP. Katsina State was a key electoral battleground because it is the home state of both the PDP candidate and current state governor Umaru Yar'Adua and his most prominent challenger, former military ruler Muhammadu Buhari. In many communities in Katsina State, Human Rights Watch observed that polling stations never opened. However, these same areas later announced overwhelming victories for the PDP. In Dodgy municipality, Human Rights Watch saw crowds of would-be voters waiting for polling materials that were never delivered. Ballot boxes and ballot papers were instead diverted to the home of the local government chairman, where Human Rights Watch found ballot boxes along with staff of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, who were lottering about and claiming that voting had already been completed and the results tabulated. The ranking INEC official in Dodgy told Human Rights Watch that voting had finished just 2 hours after the opening of polls due to the massive enthusiasm of the voters.
As I speak with you now, I have not received anything from the secretary to the commission. I do not give results to anybody. The results we announce formally as INEC are results that are declared here.
But I think the Nigerian people are continuing to show enthusiasm in the elections. You get a sense that people are beginning to believe that their votes really count.
Due to the massive enthusiasm of the voters, tally sheets in the possession of electoral officials indicated a large turnout with 95 and in some cases 100% of all vote cast in favor of the PDP. One local opposition candidate told Human Rights Watch they expected rigging but never imagined they would not even allow the people to cast their votes. Where voting did occur, Human Rights Watch observed serious irregularities and intimidation. Voters were not afforded secrecy as ballot boxes were set up outdoors with other would-be voters crowding around them. At some polling stations visited by Human Rights Watch, PDP party agents stood over voters, shoulders watching as they marked their ballots. Human Rights Watch saw money exchanged from votes in many areas and elsewhere. Scores of young children turned up to vote with voter registration cards in hand. At several polling stations, ballot boxes or ballot papers were stolen by gangs of thugs. In General Buhari's hometown of Douala, supporters of his opposition All Nigerian People's Party (ANPP) rioted when it was discovered that electoral officials had delivered only half of the ballot papers that should have arrived at local polling stations. In the clashes that ensued, homes and businesses of prominent PDP members were touched. 2 people were killed and at least 6 were wounded. The following day in Douala's General Hospital, Human Rights Watch saw several badly wounded young women and men, including one young teenager who had been shot in the stomach allegedly by soldiers attempting to bring rioting under control. In the whole of Gombe State, voting did not begin until after 3 p.m. due to the late arrival of presidential ballot papers by plane from Abuja. In some areas, the materials simply did not arrive at all. In Balanga and Yamaltu, Delba local government, voters waited in vain for electoral materials and INEC staff to appear. Presiding officers and polling clerks in Balanga were dismayed by the non-arrival of materials. One INEC clerk in Telesi, Balanga, told Human Rights Watch they were not surprised people are angry. There was no election in Balanga. Human Rights Watch saw voting materials distributed at the INEC office in Yamatu, Deba. But even as ballot papers were sent off to their polling areas, INEC and PDP officials made off with the result sheets that should have accompanied them in a private car. The results recorded on the result sheets are the only official record of results. Some voting did take place in Gombe town, but in 6 polling stations visited, voting began between 3:30 and 4 p.m. and had ended by 5 p.m. before most registered voters had cast their ballots. In federal low-cost polling units, local residents claimed that no more than 130 people had voted by 5 p.m. However, official result sheets at the collection center claimed that more than 900 votes had been cast in that short period, 876 of them for the PDP. At collection centers in Kamara Primary School, Jakada Fari, and the local government INEC office in Gobe Town, Human Rights Watch witnessed the stuffing of ballot boxes by two young men who added ballot papers to a ballot box whose results were in the process of being counted by electoral officials. The filling in of result sheets by INEC officials together with PDP party agents and the changing of results from one form to another in the local government office in Gobe Town. The electoral officer who was to supervise the collection of final results there was asleep in his office while PDP agents and INEC staff were filling in result sheets on the premises. No opposition party representatives were present. Aside from the gross fraud perpetrated on polling day, ruling party supporters and hired thugs targeted members of the opposition for arrest and intimidation. Many opposition supporters and officials were detained without charge in Gobe State before and during polling day. Lawyers for the detained claim they are representing more than 200 cases. Human Rights Watch interviewed 10 opposition party representatives in Gobe police station who had been held for a week without charge. Even the police officer guarding them said they should be released. They have done nothing wrong. Nigeria's security services played a controversial role in the polls. Polls were widely accused of failing to do enough to protect voters from violence and safeguard the integrity of the process. In Gobe, local government INEC office, 3 police officers watched while PDP agents intimidated an INEC official into changing a result sheet. A PDP cabinet member of the state government assaulted a candidate for the AMPP while in a police station in Durban, Gombe State, and the police present simply watched. In some areas, however, police personnel made valiant efforts to protect polling stations from gangs of thugs and general disorder. Too often, however, well-intentioned police officers appear to have been intimidated by party thugs and the climate of intimidation. In one police station in Katsina town, a police officer who attempted to stop the theft of a ballot box was beaten with his own club by a gang of thugs and forced to flee. At another police station, the police officer on duty told Human Rights Watch that he felt he had been assigned a hopeless task because the government just wants to impose their candidate upon the voters. These elections were a true milestone for Nigeria, but they have signaled regressions rather than progress. In 2007, 8 years after the end of military rule, Nigeria has yet to hold a credible election, raising concerns of 4 more years of poor governance and human rights abuse. Nigeria is currently enjoying its longest ever period of civilian rule since independence in 1960, after having emerged from a disastrous stretch of military rule in 1999. However, general elections in 1999 and 2003 were marred by widespread rigging and violence, and the leaders thrown up in those elections have been implicated in rampant corruption and widespread human rights abuse. The country's human rights record remains disastrous, fueled in large measure by the near total impunity enjoyed by those in political office and in the security forces. Government at all levels remains humbled by corruption, and this has kept the majority of Nigerian citizens mired by poverty and deprived of basic health and education services. Initial international reactions to the violence and fraud of the recent elections have been relatively robust. The US government said that it is deeply troubled by the outcome of the electoral process. The British Foreign Secretary said she was deeply concerned at the reports of fraud. This is a welcome contrast to recent years, where Nigeria's foreign partners have largely been silent concerning widespread and serious human rights abuse in the country.